Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video I wanted to do a build showcase on the TurDro hybrid, and specifically for today on one of its variants, which is the Negotiator variant, as I feel going into all of its variants would make this a little bit too long, and a little bit more of a scope for maybe a masterclass than just a build showcase. As always, I will be using my build collection quite extensively and pictures from there. And for today specifically, we're going to be using the highlighted one, which is the 107 TurDro Negotiator Hybrid. And everything, as always, will be linked down below, both the collection and, of course, the build pictures that I'll be showing here today. As always, with these build showcases will be separated out into two chapters. One is me first going into into the build itself and how to lay it out, how I've laid out mine. And also we will be going into a little bit of the numbers and how it compares to other builds and damage output. And then we will move on to a second chapter of gameplay where I will take it into missions and live narrate while I play them and try to give you insights in how to play them effectively. To actually jump into the build itself, as you see here, this is the Negotiator variant of the TurDro hybrid, and what TurDro hybrid means is it's a hybrid of a TurDro and something else, in this case, a red build. And these work decently well. They are pretty strong, as you basically make effective use of the two skill slots to deal more damage. As normally with most red builds, you of course use these as more your utility. Here you're giving up that utility to gain damage output in those slots. And that's basically the underlying intent of this build. And these builds are mostly also made effective with the use and since the release of the capacitor and the use of the capacitor. To jump into Negotiator a little bit, we have the 4-piece of the Negotiator, and we're using it with the backpack talent. And of course, with the 2-piece and the 3-piece, we get crit chance and crit damage. And then we have at the 4-piece, we have the mechanic of a Negotiator, which is marking targets, and crit damage hits will be spread amongst all those targets. So every time that you do a crit shot, it will be applied to all of your other targets as well. And with the backpack, it goes to being the full 100% of the damage. So if you crit for 400k on an enemy, if you have 2 other marked targets, it will also spread to them with 400k, with some exceptions where stuff like DTH, DTA, and such apply a little bit weird, but just to keep it simple, that is the basis of it. You mark targets and you spread damage between them. And you mark them by critting them. So you have to shoot them usually more than just once, just to be safe, as you will at most have 60% crit chance. And that means that, yeah, you shoot a few targets and then you main one other target. And here we're doing it without the chest of Negotiator, which would increase it to having 5 targets. Here we have a max of 3 targets. But especially the chest is actually one of the reasons that this kind of style of build works together with the capacitor, and that is the talent of glass is very important here, and specifically perfect glass cannon. And perfect glass cannon is so good here that it's also better than having any other brand with normal glass cannon here, because of course we could increase our personal damage a little bit more by having a Gruppo with normal glass, for instance here, as this is a mid-range to almost close or long-range build, and as such it doesn't really benefit from this headshot damage. But what this extra 5% is applying to both our weapon and our skills. And that is also the strength of perfect glass cannon. It's applying to all of our output, so it's also applying to our skills. And that makes this the easy choice for all TurDro hybrids. You have other options in having, especially Overwatch is one of the options, or just having weapon damage talent and losing a little bit on your skills. But I feel very strongly that glass is actually a really easy choice here, as also you have the turret and the drone as agitators, as just harassers and skirmishers to take aggro away from you if need be. If you put both of them on enemy, they will, just the proximity, especially of the drone, will take away the aggro of them, and then you can pop back up and shoot along with them. And that's also why I feel that this build works well, is in that same way, is that the negotiator mechanic and the turret and drone, the turret and drone allow you to have a lot more awareness, to have a little bit more, to basically put them a little bit more in the front, have them take more of the aggro, you stay more mid-range, and you focus more on just keeping up multiple targets marked. And as I will show in a second with the numbers, it is very important to keep multiple targets marked. That is what makes this build effective. For this final piece, I'm using a Seska mask here. A coyote would also be an effective choice here, as this is in a range where coyote would work as well, but then you would also have need to have a chest with where the core is yellow cored. And that leads us into that this is with 5 yellow cores on the build itself. As if I actually bring up the build picture of it, where it's a little bit easier to see, as we have it there, you can see that we have 2 crit chances on the build, on the pieces that have multiple stats, which is the mask and the chest, and everything else is crit damage. And that lets us, with the capacitor, reach pretty decent crit chance, crit damage of 57 and 203. It would be 203 if all of the mods on this build were full. They aren't here, but if maxed out, it will be 203. This is also, the numbers-wise, the better layout for this, as you could, of course, also swap 1 crit chance more for crit damage and go basically 63, having it cap back down to 60, so you're wasting 3 crit chance. And then you would have 1 crit damage here less, dropping you to 190. Calculation-wise, this one works out better. And also, this leaves a little bit of a hole, as coyotes are actually pretty common now, and you usually do get a fill-up from your allies by either them being in mid-range or long-range, and that fills up that little bit at the end of it there. And as you can see here as well, we have 5 pieces have skill tiers. Which pieces have them really doesn't matter. If you had the chest also be a skill tier, then you can also drop in a coyote here, which actually does work well. I don't have it set up that way, as I find this way works fine. And together, those 5 on the gear together with technician, and that also means that we're pretty much locked into technician, gives us that 6 skill tiers. And it is that 6 skill tiers that really makes the turret and the drone actually deal quite good damage. As if we jump back into the game, you can see here that they gain damage already from just their skill tiers. So for the turret, at 6 skill tiers, it's already at 120 plus damage at skill tier 6. And for instance, if you had a full 3-piece Empress, 2-piece Hanayu, 1-piece Wyvern skill build, TurDro build, then you would add another 100 to this damage. So we're basically halfway there already. So we're halfway on the damage end of a TurDro build. Actually, even more, because you get diminishing returns for the skill damage. But these turret and drone, even without, because the build itself, of course, had 0 skill damage on it. There is no skill damage stats on the build itself. And yeah, that means that we're just using that skill tiering. And that's actually enough to make the turret and the drone deal decent enough damage. They are, of course, not as strong as a full-blooded skill damage one would be. But in return, we get having the negotiator mechanics and having good damage output on our weapon end. If we actually jump to discussing the skills are basically locked to a turret and drone. You do not have any skill haste, so a lot of the other skills drop off. As the turret and drone, what their strength especially is that you drop them down, they have this long duration, and they have a cooldown that is manageably low, even without. So here we have no skill haste except for more watch. And it is still a manageable 21 seconds for the turret and a 22, close to 23 seconds for the drone. So both of those, you just have to be aware of when to deconstruct them, when you're moving up, or when there's good times to, especially the drone, as you cannot pick that back up. And I will touch on that on the gameplay, especially as that is really one of the tactics that you kind of have to learn to be effective with this build. But yeah, you're basically locked into having the turret and the drone. No other skill really works well here, as you do not have any skill haste, as most other skills do require that. Sniper turret is also an option, but personally I feel that, especially with this build, I prefer to have these two turrets and drones out, as they just basically work automatically. They do take a little bit of babysitting, but they aren't as intensive as a sniper turret. And that's really handy because that lets you focus on keeping up the negotiator mechanic. Weapon-wise, we are locked into the capacitor, and we're really using all parts of the capacitor in this case, where in the combat medic one, we were using the capacitor as well, but we were wasting parts of it. Here, we're basically making full use of that regaining skill tiers to weapon damage. So we have 6 skill tiers. We're basically getting 3 red cores back for that. And that lets us land on a pretty decent 100 weapon damage here, combined weapon damage. So, that is decent enough, together with the crit chance, crit damage. Of course, we do not have any damage to targets out of cover or such, which other builds would have, or normal red build would have. But what we give up there, we're trying to recoup by our turret and our drone. And of course, here we are making full use of that capacitor mechanic, and the capacitor mechanic is basically charge it up to 40 stacks. Each hit is a stack, and at full stacks, you gain 60 skill damage. And this one decays so slowly that it is actually pretty easy to keep up. The other weapon recommendation that I would give is to have a Future Perfect on a rifle, and I especially like having M1A. M1A Classic specifically, as that is a very hard-hitting rifle, so it makes it easy to basically snipe last hits on enemies, especially as this build also has good damage output. It isn't a full skill build or TurDro build, so it can actually kill with its weapons. And that makes it decently useful to once in a while pop off this Future Perfect, get yourself your personal personal overcharge, as especially with the turret and the drone. They do increase in damage output, so the striker gains a little bit more. That is 55 extra striker damage, and the turret gains an extra also 55 damage output. And yeah, that is actually pretty useful once in a while to just hit that overcharge, and you make use of that. And I will try to show that in gameplay, but also it's one of those things, after a while you will know when to use this, as there are places where it's obvious to use it, basically to start a fight or to gain an advantage, especially for boss fights and such. So moments of high burst output would make stuff easier. Pistol wise, we're just using, I always use Card 45s. With normal stats is a normal Card 45. We do not need the custom, as an extra skill tier would not do anything for us here. And in this case, I'm using it with InSync, and that is just if I run out of all ammo or if Pistolero is active, I will run it for that. One of the other things that actually makes the capacitor very viable, by the way, that I want to touch on is, of course, we get this extra 10 crit chance and this 30 crit damage. So the talent that is actually what makes this build a lot more viable, as when the capacitor came in, these kind of builds started to become viable, as 10 crit chance, 30 crit damage is more than any other weapon can provide. Same with its recouping of weapon damage from skill tiers. The only downsides really are, of course, that you're locked in to having a 41 round mag, which sucks a little bit. And of course, capacitor, as always, has the stats or the secondary attribute, well, the secondary and tertiary of a shotgun, basically. It has the 12% to damage to armor that shotguns normally would have, instead of the 21 damage to health that a normal AR would have. Now, this helps mostly with other places where, with skills that do benefit from damage to armor, like explosives and such. But the ballistic skills, and the ballistic skills are the turret, the drone, and the sniper turret, they do not get any benefit from damage to armor, or damage to health for that matter. So they do not benefit at all from those, and they would, a little bit more DTH would actually have been nice here. And specialization-wise, we are locked into the technician. The technician provides so much benefit to us that no other specialization would benefit us as much, as just that skill tier is very nice. Having the Faraday is very nice. The MP grenades are, as always, very nice as well. But just that skill tier especially is very strong. And we will also, if we land into some Black Test mission, Faraday will also, it's very strong as well. If we actually jump into, before we jump into the numbers, I briefly wanted to touch on, so the other versions that exist of this build is to just do it with a high end. And as you can see here, here it's done exactly that. This is the variant. This is 207 on the build collection, and I will link this one as well. And here you will see that, yeah, it is a high end. It is basically, it is in the same vein kind of as the Combat Medic. I see these two builds as basically siblings of each other, the Combat Medic and the TurDro Hybrid. And here, instead of going repair skills on a lot of the pieces, here we're going skill damage, of course. So we're gaining 60 skill damage here, and that increases our output of our turret and drone by a lot. We are giving up the mechanic of Negotiator. We are landing a little bit shorter on crit damage, especially. We're landing on 177, but that's still decent enough stats, more than enough to kill with. And we're still using the capacitor and the rest of the layout. And this is the high-end variant, which we will not be touching into, but I just wanted to show it here. This is actually the origin, for me at least, of these kinds of builds, of the TurDro and hybrids, as they basically, for me, grew up alongside of the Combat Medic. And the Negotiator variant is one of the variants that I enjoy a lot, because it works well, and you have an extra mechanic on top of it. And to show one other variant in the same vein as with the Combat Medic, this variant basically strips out a few of those skill damages and regains crit chance and crit damage for it, basically. And this one lands on even higher crit damage. And this one even also has more crit or skill damage than this variant, but of course it doesn't have the Negotiator variant or the Negotiator mechanics. And the Negotiator mechanics are very strong, as I will show in a second with stats. But this is just to show that you can make these in a lot of different ways, as I will also touch on a little bit after the numbers. If we actually do jump towards some of the numbers, and I jump to here, we can see that here I've prepared, as always, one of my calculation sheets. And if you do not know how these work, easiest is to watch the video that I did on them quite recently. And that will explain it really well. But just in this case, the numbers are linked per row, and every row is color-coded to match between up there and below here. And all you really need to know is that also all of these percentages are comparing to this top row build. And this top row build, as always, is a glass vigilance red. As I always do use these three builds as basically my comparison point, as I know them well, and I know that I know how they feel, basically what their output is, and they are always the build that I compare with. And this is with the stats of a FAMAS and then the stats of having a full glass red, basically, without contractors in this case. Now here I've also prepared, then in the green is the TurDro Negotiator. Yeah, we do shorten it to TurDro, and yeah, because of course we do. And here I've prepared it in having the stats of having basically shooting at one target, having no marks up. And then these second and third one of it are at 2 marks, shooting 2 marks, and basically having full output on 2 marks, and then having full output on 3 marks. Just to show a little bit of their output. One thing I kind of want to do here is actually I've prepared it here as having a weapon talent, as of course the TurDro negotiator here is locked to that capacitor. It will not gain any weapon talent on top of this, where the glass and the obliterate and the unbreakable red do. So just for fairness, I'm just going to add an extra 10%, basically an extra 10% multiplier, simulating somewhat strained. Strained is like 9 point something percent for that build, 9.7-ish%, I believe. Just to make the comparison a little bit more fair, just so the numbers don't lie as much as they would otherwise do, basically, as that just does take the build of the negotiator a little bit down. But here you can still see that as long as when we're shooting one target, and if we're especially comparing it to this top class vigilance red, we are only doing, even less than half than the burst, close to half on the sustain. But the second we go to 2 targets, we already are catching up a little bit, and we're getting closer. And once we do 3 targets at once, we actually overtake the glass red. And this is just the weapon part. So here I'm actually not even calculating in what the turret and the drone would do as well. But of course, you have to be aware that you are not going to keep up 3 marks all the time. It's close to impossible. There are many waves where it's just a few reds, and you will mark one with 2 shots, move on to the next one, and when you put 2 shots on them, you will kill the other one already because they don't have that much health. And keeping up 3 marks is pretty much impossible outside of some specific situations, like Drago, for instance, maybe where you're fighting the 3 bosses and you can get full output there, but even there it's actually not a good idea because the damage is getting spread over all their parts. But I'm digressing. But just to make sure that I make it clear that this number, of course, does seem like a lot, and it is, but keeping 3 marks up is not something that you can do at all the times. Keeping 2 marks up is even something that you will not do all of the time, as sometimes there is just 1 target left. But this just shows a little bit that marking is very important, especially on our sustain end, and of course on our burst end as well. And this together with our turret and drone, and I haven't added in the turret and the drone here because I'm not fully confident on stats, especially for the turret and drone, especially the RPM. And I didn't want to put out any numbers that I wasn't very confident of. But you can basically, if you know the game a little bit, you can make an educated guess that you're adding quite a bit to this just from 6 skill turret and drone. And that means that we are actually surpassing glass vigilance red if we output well, if we are doing multiple marks at all times, having our turret and drone and we have good uptime. And that was always what this build did well, is that it did used to beat glass vigilance red, as it could output more than it, especially on positions where you had longer fights. So especially control points and such, a build like this would actually outperform a glass vigilance red, especially also in some missions, for instance, Tidal or something, or Stranded Tanker as well, where you have prolonged fights in one area where this TurDro hybrid can set up basically continuously output, because it will lose quite a lot when it doesn't get the chance to basically, in a fast moving mission especially, for instance, it doesn't get the chance to set up its turret and its drone and then start firing and then start marking stuff. But especially in places where there are longer fights, for instance, Tidal, where you have several long prolonged fights in one area, especially the boss fight, for instance, where you're in one area and you can get set up and then just do damage in that area, it will always it will easily beat a glass red vigilance. And that's also what I really like these for. These were actually more damaging than Glass Vigilance Reds, and they are actually also a little bit more of a challenge to play, because in the same vein as the Combat Medic was playing as a red build and healing, here you still have to do all of the red build things. And on top of that, also use a turret and drone effectively. So actually, I feel that these are more challenging than a normal glass red. One thing as well that I wanted to then show is the reason why I don't use them as much anymore, especially since Heartbreaker and Striker came in, as while I did use these, especially in the past, as more damaging builds than a glass red, that took a little bit more doing, and you're basically playing a glass red without a hive, so it is its own challenge. But since Heartbreaker came in, as you can see here, the numbers for an Obliterate Striker, which isn't even the chest variant, which would even have higher numbers for both of both its burst and its sustain. These numbers are quite high, and it becomes the thing of would I run this when I can run this? Would I run this 9.6 million burst on the weapon and trying where I have to 3 mark as well, and then maybe with the turret and the drone adding into it, I could beat a Striker Obliterate, or just stack with the ACS and quickly get to 11 million. And this is also kind of the reason why these builds, I still use them quite often just for their own challenge, just for the variety. And they're also really good solo builds, even though personally I run tech tanks more. But I do know others that prefer this kind of build, especially to the tech tanks for solo, as you have 2 things to take aggro away from you, and you still have a pretty damaging output yourself. But this does show the Striker output, that Striker is a little bit overtuned, and this is kind of the reason why I would prefer Striker to get a little bit of a nerf, be brought back in line with all of the other builds, as it is taking some viability away from other builds. As always, I will also link to this calculation sheet as well, and also empty calculation sheets of these where you can fill them in. And if you're interested in it, the video explaining how to fill these in is already up, and you can check that one out. One last thing I wanted to touch on before we actually jump over to gameplay is that as with all hybrids builds, you can play around and variant them quite effectively, as of course you could give up a few skill tiers and go future perfect main weapon, which is what this build used to be before Capacitor existed. One thing as well that you can do and is quite effective is go Memento and then have an extra Negotiator piece in the mask slot, and especially the chest you always do want to keep as this perfect glass cannon, as that is actually really important to this build. But having a Memento in here, of course, would let you build up those stacks. It improves both your weapon and your skill damage end by having that skill efficiency. And even if you don't pick up the short ones, you're making quite effective use of both of those 2 parts. And of course, you're regenning a little bit. So that is actually very strong, especially for longer engagements. So if you were to run this, for instance, in Summit or something, then Memento would work well. Now, of course, with the introduction of the Ninja Bike could also be put in here, but personally, I would rather have just the Negotiator backpack and have that increase from there, as I do not feel that the Negotiator backpack or the Ninja Bike backpack works well with Negotiator at all. There are better choices for the backpack slot, basically. I would either choose a Vigilance backpack over it, or just having the Negotiator backpack as I have here. But as always, it's a hybrid, and hybrids are a lot more easy to variant out to different versions. But what you are basically locked into is the Capacitor, at least to me, what I feel. The Capacitor, the Technician, having the chest be perfect glass, and the turret and the drone. And as you saw, the rest is basically all negotiable as the other builds, especially the high-end ones, showed as well. Now, having said all that, I'm going to get set up for some gameplay, and I will join you in the loading screen in a second. And here I'm matchmaking to Jefferson Trade Center. And that could be a decent enough mission for this build. What this build really likes is having long fights in settings, and the boss fight, for instance, here is somewhat of that. But a lot of the rest of the mission is actually pretty fast moving. Here I'm going to pop my drone, try to catch up, check that this chest is already opened, and try to also mostly make sure that I always have at least a target or two up, and making use of the negotiator mechanics. Here I know that turret no longer had an owner, so I can push up pretty hard. What I will do here is actually put my turret up there and move along with it. And yeah, what you always want to do is to have your turret at least elevated, preferably. But the downside is, especially if you throw it up that high, is that you have to deconstruct it afterwards. You do not get to grab it back. So usually what I will do is throw it on chest high cover so I can retrieve it if need be. But here I know that this run will likely be just long enough that the cooldown will expire. They had already looted that loot, so they've likely ran this already today. And I'm going to try and get some spread damage out, mark stuff in the background there, and try to kill them by shooting this elite. Skill-wise, all my allies are a little bit weird. Well, two of them are a little bit weird. One of them is just a red build stats. Even though they likely aren't a full red build, as they are only level 41, and this is looted as well, so that tells me that they have run this mission already. In a second I will actually take a second to inspect my allies, know what they are. I'm not as bound to what they are. I don't really care much. For level 41 that was a really good build, and yeah, that is a half build and a non-build. So actually the level 41 has one of the other better builds here. They've looted that one as well. Yeah, we're going to push up with them, and especially this garage part, I should be able to do a decent amount, as I have good positions to put my turret and my drone. We also don't have any directives active, as especially the skill directive one of this season. It doesn't hamper the TurDro a little bit, but it's one extra thing that you have to basically keep an eye on. I'm going to put my turret up here, and that's because it also can shoot that door in a second where most of them spawn. I'm going to put my drone on the heavy. I'm going to mark a few things. We also are getting overwatch from one of our allies. And I'm going to basically mark stuff and use that heavy to... Actually, here I'm going to just kill these guys. But then I'm going to mark stuff and use the heavies for their spread damage amounts. And put my turret and my drone as harassers. I see we're getting surrounded. We have one heavy on that side. I'm going to chain him. Heavies aren't as dangerous. You can, especially if you're on a build that has some damage, I can, as long as they're not supported. So here, nothing else can shoot me while this guy is active. I see that my drone is back, so I'm going to pop it. Nothing else could shoot me there, so it was basically a one versus one for that instance. And that means that I can basically, I can chain him infinitely. He will not be able to really do anything against me. Going to not heal up here because I feel that I can kill more than enough here to keep myself up. Now I'm going to heal just to give myself a little bit of certainty. I'm going to cover. Actually, they are getting him with revive 5. And we're just going to keep pushing on. But again, I've put my turret in a position that I could actually climb up there and recover it, but I'm just going to deconstruct it. As I know that, again, we're going to go into a pretty long corridor, so my skills will recover here. I'm fully expecting my allies to do the kills there. I'm going to pick that up to share with that low-level player. They've also popped the key chest up there. Yep, they have. Going to move slow, show intent that I don't want to rush in solo, as most players will actually pay attention to allies, how they're moving. If they see you rush, they might feel inclined to rush as well. But if they don't, if you don't, they are less likely to as well. And especially for this room, I want to move in as a group. Going to put my drone on him. I'm going to push up pretty aggressively because I want to have my turret up there so he can shoot at everything that spawns in this room. And from there, I'm going to move on to back to the mechanic of this build. Going to mark stuff and then make use of the spread damage. And that's what this build is. It's a red build where you're also making sure, where you're trying to make sure that your turret and your drone are also always active. And that can actually be challenging. It's extra stuff for you to keep an eye on, which in itself can sometimes it takes a little bit of doing before you're fully comfortable with it. Even for me, it took quite a while before I felt that I was getting most out of this build, especially if you don't have the experience of running TurDro builds. As a lot of people there's always, of course, the joke of it's an AFK build or something. If you're playing a scale build nowadays as an AFK build, you're doing it wrong, basically. You gain so much from capacitor and from, I'm going to check if that chest has also been looted, and it has. You gain so much from InSync and capacitor nowadays that AFKing a scale build is a waste. I'm not going to rush. Actually, I am. I was going to say I'm not going to rush up to the position where I normally go, because actually I'm a little bit late because one person did rush in a little bit. That's okay. I made it, especially as somebody did choose to use a flame grenade there, which was a really good choice on their part. And here I'm just going to work on these. And what I'm actually going to do here is move up my turret and place it up here and try to catch out this build, or this wave. What I don't want to have happen here is that I go down, so I am actually going to fall back. I'm going to fall back all the way to here. And I'm just going to make use a little bit of spread damage. I was armor broken already, but my turret and my drone are up there. I'm having a look around where my allies are. None of them are really in a good position to come get me. So this guy is coming for me, so I'm going to put myself in a position where they can somewhat easily get me, which that side wasn't really. One thing that is important to know is when you go down, your turret and your drone still stay up in the world till you die. The one thing you don't want to do is actually die, as long as you're just in that down state where you can still crawl around and such. Your turret and your drone will stay active. So one thing you do want to do is never do that giving up, and even if it may be a long fight, to do the stem bleeding action. As at least your turret and your drone are still active at that point. And here is actually where this build will have some decent effectiveness, is where we're going to have a long fight with several waves. I'm going to put my drone as fast as I can on the boss, just to harass her. I'm going to put my drone on this right, or my turret on this right side, to try and harass a little bit out here. I'm going to use that one to CC with. And here I'm actually going to blind fire to get some damage out. I'm going to heal back up. There is a sniper turret up somewhere, or that was the boss, either or. And I'm going to work a little bit on this left side and make sure that my turret and my drone are actually firing. My drone isn't. I don't have a good line of sight to the boss, but what I can do there is actually mark them and use that mark to get some spread damage on them. I did reach armor break, so I'm going to be well aware of that. A second shot from the boss would take me down instantly. I'm going to work on these guys. I'm going to have a look on the left side where my other allies are and see if I can... I'm going to move up for this ally, take a sniper shot to the face. They hopefully stay there, which they do. To pop my drone. Ah, they're blocking me from from getting across. Gonna put my drone on them, harass them, and then get back to killing.
Serious trauma.
I am back into my health gate there, and actually my health gate had recovered there, so that's what saved me there. I am out of medpacks. I'm going to push back and get my turret, as that is a large chunk of my DPS output. And but we are also at the last few waves. Well, the last wave specifically. Both of my skills are on cooldown, so I am a lot less effective here, as my skills did take a lot of the aggro. And my allies aren't doing great, but here I'm pretty confident in being able to blow up their backpack before they get me. Even though they still did almost. I tried to heal there, but I have no more medpacks. I am the last one standing, which kind of concerns me. And I have no more medpacks. I'm going to make sure... I'm going to basically play it safe here. I could go after that last enemy, kill them quickly. I'm just going to play it safe. Get them back up. This is likely the last enemy. Yes, and that recovers the other two. But just in case that wasn't the last enemy, I wanted to basically make sure that we don't wipe. And that wasn't very clean, that wasn't very good, but yeah, sometimes your allies also matter. And I'm pretty confident that if in a second I look at the stats here, that yeah, that there was no contest in this mission for output. And I'm actually also going to check real quick. Okay, they didn't have a death, so they didn't wipe before. And yeah, that striker was the only one that was kind of competing with us, as with missions like this, where there's missions of hyenas, where it isn't a lot of weak points hitting weak points, which bugs out the damage. You can kind of infer that the damage dealt is actually quite correct, and also just from the kills we can also guess that this build was the top damage dealer in this mission. And in a second I will actually join you for a second piece of gameplay. And for that second piece of gameplay, I'm actually going to do a few solo control points, as I feel this build actually is really powerful for that as well. As this is what I actually did use to run a lot solo, these kinds of builds, the TurDro hybrids, not specifically just this one, although this one is one of the better ones, I feel. It's especially that negotiator mechanic is actually pretty challenging to get the most out of, and it deals pretty good damage on its own. One thing I do want to make a note of is that I did actually go grab my grade 20 capacitor as well for here, where in the other sections I didn't have it, as I basically forgot to go grab it. And so here I've increased my damage by a little bit, likely 10%, actually going from 100 to 110, or to 120. That is a 10% increase, as that is a very easy calculation. So yeah, we should be doing 10% more with our weapon. And I'm going to do the, I forget actually the name of it, crash site. It popped up in the upper left. As I feel this one maybe might be a good one. I didn't want to pick one that I know is very easy. Something, for instance, from the Outcast or such can be quite easy, as you... my turret didn't go in the position that I wanted it to, so I have to deconstruct it, as it is completely ineffective there, as my arm did move just a second before I deployed it. And that is always one of those annoying things as well with turrets and drones, is sometimes the game kind of disagrees with you with your placement. But here I can make, especially with this first elite wave, I can make good use of the spread mechanics, as it's all elites on a heroic format, or on a heroic control point. It's the first wave is always all elite. I'm going to heal back up, as I did let myself get shot there. And again, it's about placement of your turret and your drone, and trying to keep them active at all times. As you can see, this build, we're on heroic solo. Of course, the scaling isn't as high, but it's killing everything pretty fast. It's especially when you make good use of its spread mechanics, it actually kills really fast, as Negotiator always does. If you can make good use of its of having multiple marks, then your output can be actually very strong, as Negotiator is probably the only thing that still competes in positions where you can have multiple marks and have great output that way. Can compete with Striker. I'm going to try and I got the helmet already. I'm going to now try and get the backpack so that they do their wiggle dance. While they're doing their wiggle dance, I'm going to kill that last other one, and that just leaves us and the boss. One thing you may have noticed there is that I didn't call for backup. A lot of people instantly call for backup. I usually never do. I always break it up into 2 fights, as now I can basically deconstruct my turret and my drone, especially on a turret-drone hybrid. So on a tech tank, I care a lot less about that. I will actually instantly call them in just to have it be done quicker. But on a heroic one, they will get here before I'm done with the fight anyway. But this way, I get to have a break in the fight. So I get to go up here, place my turret, then call them in. And in this way, I'm basically fully recharged. I got to also go grab ammo.
Detecting additional hostile contacts.
And especially with this one, I chose this control point, as I know that they come from several angles, and they come from pretty far away as well. So it isn't an easy camp. It's not one of the harder control points, but it's a mid-tier one, basically. You see me try to make use of my spread mechanic, marking 2 targets and shooting one of them. Now they spawn from the sewers on the left side. I'm going to try and mark them while they're coming up. Here I'm way outside of my optimal, but also I'm not going to move up. I'm a glass. I don't do well getting shot at. I'm not tanky or anything. But what I can do is, while they're at range, try to mark them all and shoot the closest target. And that's also one of the things that Negotiator actually does very well. It is actually even really nice to use with SMGs, as you can mark 2 far away targets, and you yourself then basically shoot a closer one, shoot something inside of your optimal. And the effect of Negotiator doesn't care about optimal at all, so it'll output towards it'll output your full output, basically, as long as the target that you're shooting at, that you have marked and that you're shooting at as the main target, that one is inside of your optimal range. And you see it's pretty decently fast for a control point. We did that decently quickly. We had good spawns as well. They didn't spawn all the way out in nowhere land, which they sometimes do. I'm going to quickly go over here and actually grab this loot, see what we get. This is actually Aces and Eights zone, which, yeah, the Aces and Eights has somewhat diminished in, in usability, even though it already was pretty low in its usability. I'm going to actually check what the boss loot is, and we will likely actually move on to doing maybe a few more control points, just to give me a little bit more time to talk about this build and have some more gameplay. So I'll join you for those in a second. And here I'm making my way towards Navy Plaza in Federal Triangle. So that is going to be the next control point that we assault. As there's a little bit of a trick to this one that most people do know, but I thought I might use this opportunity as well to show that as well. I'm going to actually, there's a lot of stuff in the background there, as you see, and I'm going to mark them and actually use that trick of marking something far and shooting something close to take care of them. As I've already taken care of 2 of them. There's a medic with them. I'm trying to see if I can get a mark on them. They are hyenas, it seems. Yep, they are. And one thing I'm going to try to do here is make sure that I kill that hyena back there, just so that I don't have anything in my back. As you saw, the positioning of my turret up there is just very aggressive and very much in a position where it can... anything that tries to push up towards me is going to get hit by it, and that's going to lead to it actually grabbing a lot of aggro. And also it will make AI hesitant to go past it, basically. So you see these guys, they're already, instead of rushing up to me, they're instead walking up there because they are engaged by that turret. And especially with a control point like this, where there's left side and right side spawns, I can actually mark pretty well and make effective use of my marking. And one thing I also kind of wanted to note on as well is, just so we're clear on that, is the turret and the drone, of course, don't actually add anything to your marking. Only you and your weapon does marking for the negotiator marks, as the turret and drone, of course, can't mark at all. They cannot crit. But even for some of the weapon talents or some of the gear set talents, like for instance True Patriot, where it only requires weapons hits, it actually requires it to be weapon hits. So your turret and drone with a True Patriot build also do not actually apply your True Patriot flags. But just so we're clear on that. So the negotiator part, we're just using the negotiator because it's a really heavy damage dealing build, and we can, and it does not require the chest, and that leaves us open to use a glass chest. That is actually why we're using negotiator. The turret and the drone part are just bonuses on top of it. Here, actually, so this is the reason I didn't call them in. They will only spawn from that grate over there and this grate over here. And by not calling them in, by not calling the reinforcements in, we can actually come up here, set up here. And actually, I will show one little quirk. If I actually run past this and then, actually, I can do it by doing it like this. I'm just outside of the boundary, and that signal did not count because I was just outside of the boundary. I just basically run past it while holding the F button, and that doesn't count. You can sometimes use that to just prank your allies. But here I'm actually going to call them in, going to pop my drone as well. And here, especially with this negotiator build, with these turrets and drone, everything's going to come up from here, and they are basically in that animation for a few seconds. So while they're coming up, I will quite easily kill them, especially when they have weak points like that. And also because I am marking stuff, I can have all 3 marks up at all times quite effectively, and that makes it so that I can, farm these guys pretty easily, especially there where there was a foam guy as well, and the only thing remaining is the boss. And we are done. The downside, of course, with this is now that we have actually killed all these guys, we do have to wait for our allies. But in the time that we basically run back, they will also reach that position. But I just wanted to show that one. Some people know it, some don't. And there are with quite a few of the control points, it's very beneficial to not call them in right away, to basically make use of the ability to cheese them by their spawn. There is actually quite a few of these kinds of these ones, and also even with ones that you have several positions where they can spawn. Usually what you can do is have one person actually camp each door, as if they have good enough builds, they can do that. And then you can basically, usually there's not more than 2 or 3 spawns per for a control point, so you can place one person by each one and then use that to camp them as they spawn. And we shall just quickly see if I got anything worthwhile. We didn't, but I feel that actually does show pretty well how this build also deals with some control points solo. Of course, here we're doing it without directives, but actually this build does not care much about any of the directives except Pistolero, of course, where Pistolero does require it a little bit to build up ammo reserves. But especially the skill one for this season, which I'm blanking on the name of, Scavenge Skills. Scavenge Skills isn't that hard for this build to deal with because you only need 3 or 4 for your turret and your drone of those drops, and you get them quite easily, and that actually makes it sometimes easier to even have a better uptime on your turret and drone. Fragile armor, of course, is a bit annoying with glass. Fog of War is actually pretty mitigated by having the turret and drone where you have that Q and E markers on enemies, letting you a lot easier see where they are. And special ammo, of course, with glass as well can be a little bit annoying, but it can deal basically with all 5 directives quite easily. As even Pistolero, its weapon damage is important to it, but it's not its only output. So you can be holding the pistol for a while, letting your turret and your drone do the killing, and fill up a little bit of ammo reserves and then go on from there. So it is actually also a good build for dealing with directives. And actually I will join you guys in a second for the conclusion. And to conclude this video, I hope I showed you well what this build style is capable of. It is a heavy damage dealer. It can compete well enough with most of the red styles that currently exist in the game. It is a little bit of an acquired taste, as you have to be decently good at playing a red build, and you have to be decently good at playing a turret drone build. And both of them are their own challenges, and trying to get the most out of this build can actually be quite fun in its challenge. It can take some doing. And while it is a little bit of a harder build to make, as while I didn't make a note of it in the build section, you do require, of course, 4 pieces of Negotiator. Likely you will need at least 3 of them to have a skill tier on them, and they are actually the better targets have 4 of it. And that means that you have to find pieces with crit damage on it and then optimize it to full. As even here, as you can see, I do not have even one single piece that had crit damage maxed out to start with. They have all been optimized, and that makes it a little bit of a harder build to put together. Same for the high-end variant, and that's because you do need to recore stuff, so that takes away your easy recalibration towards other parts. But for its cost, it is actually a very challenging build to get the most out of. It can be pretty powerful, as even today I didn't even use the Future Perfect at all to, for instance, overcharge with, which I could have done. And I could have even played a little bit better and marked a bit more. But that is actually the challenge of this build. To get the most out of it, it does take some doing, as you're trying to play a full-on red build and you're trying to play a full-on TurDro build. And in that, it supplies you with some challenge. It also is a great as I showed. For solo play, it can still work well in groups. It is quite strong in both sections. It is quite generalist as well. I quite often would rather grab this than just a normal red build. The only two red builds that, in my mind, compete with this is having striker, good striker setups, either the chest backpack setup or a obliterate backpack setup, as those just do so much damage that they basically blow everything else out of the water. But I hope I showed you enough for you to consider this build, to try them out, if nothing else, for just the variation and having another build to learn and try to optimize your playstyle and the build itself for. And yeah, it is a build that can go into many variations, and I will likely do a build showcase on the high-end version somewhere in the future, as that does play quite differently, as you do not have the negotiator mechanics to deal with. And I hope you enjoyed this video. For my next one, I will likely do another build showcase, actually, on a somewhat lesser build, but one that is I quite enjoy, as you try to basically max out its mechanics. And I hope you join me for that one. Have a good night.